What's amazing about both games as well is that for all the kind of romance and silliness and humour and lightness, they never shy away from the sort of brutality of the medieval world. So literally, this was Luke and I laying across two chairs with the chairs sort of across our pelvis and just hanging in midair, and me doing a kind of terrible doggy paddle because of course Henry can't swim. One of the biggest changes from first to second game is the range of weaponry. Things like gunpowder that we would never have seen before in our lives that felt like witchcraft at that time.
Get ready!
I love everything about this opening sequence, and I feel like the trebuchet is like a metaphor for everything that KCD2 is in relation to KCD. It's kind of, the weapons have got bigger and bolder and more dramatic, and so has everything about the game. And I just think, the Warhorse understands so brilliantly narrative structure and how starting with a big dramatic punch like this, like it sort of echoes the Siege of Skalitz, or the sacking of Skalitz. So you have a kind of big dramatic event, albeit in this case a kind of flash forward in KCD2. But they just know that you've got to grab people's attention and get them in, and they do that so brilliantly in both games.
It makes Perkstein look like an outhouse. Berghoff must be
A bit like the first action sequence of the game. The scene with Hans just kind of, it does what Warhorse do so brilliantly, which is to kind of announce itself, to kind of deliver on the cinematics, the music, the kind of character-driven nature of the story, and put all those elements brilliantly into one kind of rousing sequence, and then end with that beautiful, if it were the real world, it would be a drone shot kind of panning up to reveal Trotsky. And it's just what Warhorse do so brilliantly, and they kind of throw all those elements in together and unite them in this kind of relatively short but really thrilling sequence.
Hey! Hands off her, you brute!
There's something so brilliant that Warhorse do, which is, in many ways, the opening sequences are kind of catch-ups and reminders for those that know it. But they do it in a way that is always story-driven, so it's always got a forward momentum. It always feels real and earned rather than just kind of expositional. Henry is not someone who could stand by and watch that kind of violence slide. So whatever kind of version of Henry you're going to make as the player in the second game, that sense of like standing up to injustice, and he's somebody who stands up for what's right. And immediately, whether you know Henry or not, from having played him before, you know from that moment, you're like, okay, that's the person that's going to be leading the story, and it's a kind of real core tenet of who he is. So for this, when we were doing the swimming, you might think, oh, well, it was the second game. Maybe they kind of had harnesses that they could suspend them from the roof, and they could just be swimming in midair. No, because you don't need them. It's the truth. Technically, you don't need that. So literally, this was Luke and I laying across two chairs with the chairs sort of across our pelvis, and just hanging in midair, and me doing a kind of terrible doggy paddle because, of course, Henry can't swim. And that's all it took. And it was like, it looks absolutely ridiculous and hilarious in real time. In the kind of echoes of KCD that you go, like the sacking of Skalitz set against the opening action sequence in KCD2, the kind of domestic scene with his family set against the kind of buddied scene with Hans. There's all these kind of mirrors. There's also a mirror of having shit thrown everywhere. We end up throwing it at a house in KCD, and it ends up getting thrown all over Hans at the beginning of KCD2. So there are some beautiful, big kind of metaphorical mirrors, and then there are some very simple, funny, silly mirrors, and that's one of them.
Look, wait.
What I loved when I was doing my playthrough is the gentle crossover between story and gameplay. In both games, but particularly KCD2, there's a lot of cinematic narrative cutscenes at the beginning, and they gently just hand it over to you. And it means that you sort of feel empowered. If like me, you're not a hugely experienced player, or even if you are, this is, by most people's estimation, a kind of pretty difficult open world RPG mechanically. And I remember that from these sequences where they'll just throw in a little bit of gameplay, and then you go back to the narrative. In the case of this scene in the stocks, some very fun narrative, which was very fun to perform. This is obviously a hugely emotional scene, and an incredibly upsetting one for Henry, seeing his friend possibly get hanged. I won't reveal the outcome for those that haven't yet played it. And they said, oh, would you mind being one of the people separately standing on the gantry shouting like insults at him? So on the day we shot this, I was on the one hand being his hero and saviour, trying to stop him from being hanged, but at the same time heckling him and calling him all sorts of insults and encouraging them to hang him. So that's the world of performance capture. It's really interesting to note the quality of the soundscape, which I talked a little bit about in the video of KCD. But what they were able to execute, those amazing effects where suddenly everything dumbs out almost like, post artillery explosion or something. It's so effective, and it all feeds in. The music is just as incredible, but the way it's all executed is so much more advanced that it just everything draws you in about this game, and the soundscape especially. So it's really remarkable to just remember that.
Hans?
All of the cutscenes are recorded as performance capture. All of the gameplay obviously is not. So anytime it's a cutscene like now, so that's all us performing it. What's amazing about both games as well is that for all the kind of romance and silliness and humour and lightness and fun and all that, they never shy away from the sort of brutality of the medieval world. It's not something they're trying to kind of airbrush. And that last scene, which is pretty gruesome, there's just those moments throughout both games where you're reminded that this is not the world that we know. The cost of getting things wrong was much higher than it would be today.
Ready!
Carter.
One of the biggest changes from first to second game is the range of weaponry, and most obviously in this case, things like gunpowder that we would never have seen before in our lives that felt like witchcraft at that time, and the extent to which, as a sort of technological revolution, if you like, that would have been a huge deal, and it would have felt like some sort of otherworldly power, and what that meant to us as characters, what that would do to you, how terrifying it would be, and that was really impressed upon us. And I think this sequence really kind of illustrates that, the sort of magnitude of what those new weapons meant, and how dangerous and overwhelming they were. I love this. I talked a bit before about the sort of mirroring nature and how you go, that it's so lovely seeing these scenes so close together, because you go, this is like the sort of joyous exorcism of all the trauma of Skalitz, and visually it looks the same as when Markvart arrived with his army at Skalitz. And this is the kind of positive reflection of that all those years later in the second game. The single biggest joy and challenge for me as an actor in the second game was that the range of Henrys that you were then able to create was vast. You could make him a really kind of dark, vengeful, nasty antagonist if you want to, or you can keep him being the very sort of pure, stoic, upstanding, upright man, and then everything in between, all the different versions. You can make him a romantic, you can keep him as a warrior, you can start to make him an intellectual, you can make him a diplomat. And what that means as the actor is that fundamentally you're playing the same person. There's a real importance to kind of keeping a uniformity to the character, but within that there's this huge palette of versions that you're executing. I didn't really know that was possible. It doesn't exist in TV and theatre, which makes up the main body of my work. But in this case, it's like a massive palette of different versions of the same person. And that was probably the biggest monumental acting challenge I've ever undertaken, and certainly the most rewarding.
Should we start? Ready?
I absolutely love this combat tutorial, not least because you get some time with Hans, but mostly because I found the combat really hard, and it's very necessary for new players and old to get to grips with the combat system. And definitely when I was doing my playthrough, my combat's got a bit better slowly, but I absolutely needed this combat tutorial like oxygen to survive. So this was very welcome for me. So whoever did that playthrough certainly has better combat skills than I do.
You won.
There's something so pleasing about when you successfully land an attack. It's sort of, I'm not a violent man, but there is something incredibly satisfying about that combat system. And once you finally manage to be successful, I'm not playing the game clearly in this video, but I feel that dopamine as those shots land. So well done, Warhorse, for making that so pleasing and realistic. Because the barks, as they call them, the sort of grunts and the screams and all the various things, they can be quite challenging vocally. And so we would save the barks for the end of the day. And yes, there were a huge amount of barks for KCD2, so we would just spend often about 20 minutes at the end of a session grunting and barking and moaning and screaming and dying and making all sorts of weird noises. It's a living. I don't speak much Czech. I don't speak anything like as much Czech as I should, having basically spent 10 years working on this game and about 5 years previously working on various TV shows before that. But what I have learned is plenty of swear words, and I've definitely said the word in my life now more than I thought I ever would. So that's an education of sorts. I noticed it in the other fight with Michael that there's, you know, just people are just NPCs kind of heckling in the background, and I love that the sort of rich landscape of characters just chipping in and throwing in random comments is you know, one of the many things that fills in the universe that is KCD and KCD2, and they do it so brilliantly, but also with a lot of humour, as they do everything. The amazing army of new characters that have come together in the second game. These were the cutscenes where we got to all be together on the motion capture stage. There were some amazing days of just like me on my own on the stage and kind of very solitary, a very kind of different quality to those shooting days, particularly with the family, you know, the mum and dad, which are the scenes that I love, that are real anchors and kind of the real heart of the story. But these scenes, the kind of big action sequences where we're all together, were super fun. It was just really nice to have some company on the stage and all be together. So yeah, these were a lot of fun to do. I actually haven't got to this point in my playthrough yet. I'm actually a long way from this point. And you suddenly realise how, obviously, you kind of build your capability and your skill set, you know, kind of build up perk points along the way and make it to a point where you have the combat skills and everything else to take on challenges like this, which is the whole point. But it's so fascinating watching it because I just know that I'm a long way from that, and that's the kind of joy of the game. You build up to that point of experience and capability, like life, I suppose. But it's fascinating for me to kind of look ahead. For me, playing the character of Henry has been just a huge journey and adventure, and there's many reasons for that. One of the main reasons is that the main body of my work has been in TV and theatre, so this is my first proper game. Certainly my first kind of playable character using the face and doing I'd never done performance capture at all before this. And so it's been this massive education for me in terms of the gaming universe, what games can do, particularly the relationship with communities and fans. That's something that doesn't exist in the same way at all in the other media within which I've worked. And a real kind of joyous revelation for me, because that interaction with the fan base, and we have a particularly incredibly supportive and intelligent and witty and passionate fan base. That's just been a real revelation and a kind of, as I said before, a huge privilege to play the character at the heart of all that. A massive acting challenge, an incredibly rewarding one, and one which I feel like is buoyed along by the kind of creative brilliance of Warhorse and the kind of energetic support of the fan base. It's just like borne us all aloft, and that is just the most amazing thing. And I didn't know it existed, and I certainly didn't think it was going to exist for me. So yeah, what a pleasure that has been. Well, thank you all so much for watching that. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. It's for those of you that have played KCD, it's an amazing reminder of just what an incredible journey that was and how brilliantly put together it was by the team at Warhorse.